Hello there and welcome back to the studio today. In today's episode, we are going to be creating an alla prima portrait painting study. That is, we are going to create a portrait study of a very famous painting by John William Waterhouse. And the painting that we are talking about in particular is titled The Lady of Shalott. It is a very famous painting, so if you look this up on Google, you will very likely find an image similar or better than mine. So I'm going to keep an image of our model to the top left corner of the screen so you can refer to it as the painting develops. Just know that it's fairly simple to find a photo reference of this if you just do a very simple Google search. All right, so today's episode is going to be filmed and edited in the old-fashioned style, if you remember the voiceover style, where I would be painting, quietly and then voicing it over after the fact. So on the palette here, we have titanium white, flake white, burnt umber, alizarin crimson, permanent, cadmium red, yellow ochre, sap green, ultramarine blue, and ivory black. And directly beneath the canvas, I have odorless mineral spirits and a stand oil odorless mineral spirits mixture. So that is a 1/5 stand oil to 4/5 odorless mineral spirits mixture. And it's been a long time since I've used this technique. And what I'm doing is, so if you remember in the older videos, I'm using approximately size 2 drawing brush. This is a bristle brush that I'm using to draw, and the canvas is an 11 by 14 inch cotton canvas that has been pre-toned with burnt umber oil paints several weeks before the start of today's episode. So what I'm doing is I'm looking for the top most portion of the head right there, so the corner of the top of the forehead, and I'm also looking for the bottom of the chin. I'm trying to keep the shapes rather abstract, and I'm using the burnt umber sketch, so we are using the alla prima technique. We're going to use the alla prima technique for today's episode. So I'm actually running kind of late with the footage. I'm usually a day in advance. So if you're watching this the day that it came out, I was literally filming, editing, voicing this over like the day before it came out. But that's the other trade-off with this type of voiceover technique. Now it does complicate the editing a little bit. That is, it takes me much more time to edit it, but the result in the painting is significantly increased. So that means that I'm continuously focused on the painting. You can even see that I'm wearing my brand new headphones, and they are noise canceling headphones. Do you remember all the times that I've complained about noise in the studio and the recording environment? And finally, I got myself some noise canceling headphones. And oh my goodness, if you've never used noise canceling headphones, definitely try it out. But this is not the video for that. So what I'm doing is now I'm starting to put in the gesture. So if you notice in the photo reference, the painting of or the cropped image of the Waterhouse painting. Remember, this is a master study, okay? I'm not trying to make a perfect photographic rendition, okay? I'm not going to call it a master copy. I'm going to call it a master study. So in any case, what we're doing is we're looking for the axes of the eyes, so the particular angle between the two eyes, okay? I'm using the odorless mineral spirits now and then to thin out the paint. So I'm trying to keep the paint rather fluid, but not too liquidy, if you know what I mean. I don't want it to, start to drip off the side of the canvas or anything like that. So I'm using simple straight lines and angles. Okay, so that little rectangular shape that we just blocked in was for the eye socket. And now we're starting to put in little indications for where the eyes are going to fit. And I'm going to label these as placeholders. These are my placeholders for where everything is going to fit. Placeholder means that it's not 100% certain. I'm not 100% saying that the eyes are going to be there or anything like that. If you'll notice, I'm even moving, the hair a little bit down. So the way that I'm approaching the umber sketch lately is to put in just enough to be able to go in with the large planes. Now with the alla prima approach, it is a much more fast-paced technique to creating a painting as opposed to the classical approach that we've been using for the past a long time. Okay. Um, so the idea is to be as efficient as possible, as quick as possible to get the job done. So right now what I'm doing is I'm starting to indicate where the mouth is going to fit, but there's a little bit of a hierarchy here when it comes to the features, okay? So that is, I am much more concerned or focused. Let's not be concerned. Let's be happy. So I'm much more focused on the axes of the eyes, in particular, the placement of the eyes, okay? I want to make sure to lock that in. And by locking that in, it means that I'm gauging all the other shapes relative to the eyes. So just on a practical level, it's much easier to construct with straight lines and angles, okay? It's just much more easy to see where you've gone wrong. Now, with the burnt umber drawing, okay, so I'm talking a little bit about the paint handling here. Now, see how I'm putting in a darker shape? I actually used less of the odorless mineral spirits. And as you'll notice, I'm using my older medium that I used to use, the 1/5 stand oil, 2/4 mineral spirits. And the reason being is that this study was completed in one day. And so I wanted to be able to work as long as possible without the painting getting tacky on me, which is what happens with a fast dryer, such as my usual Neo McGill. For alla primas, I usually think it's a good idea to use a slow dryer, okay? And if you're going to be layering in the classical approach, use a fast dryer because you will want to work in successive layers. Now then, so on a practical level, okay, it's much easier to focus everything on the main triangle. So the main triangle, I think of it as the two eyes and the bottom of the nose. So that creates 3 points, and then connecting those 3 points, we get a triangle. So now what I'm going to do is mix up the color value web. And, if you're new to this channel and you're wondering why on earth, I have 2 whites on the palette. One is an opaque white, the titanium white, which means that all I need is a little bit of it to raise the value quite a bit. And the flake white, I can use more of it without raising the value, thus having a thicker mixture of paint. So now what I'm doing is I'm transitioning actually into different brushes. These are bristle brushes, and these are relatively new bristle brushes, so they're actually working quite nicely. These are Robert Simmons bristle brushes, and at this point I may have forgot to mention. So if you would like to know exactly what materials and or purchase the same type of materials that I'm using, I have the materials typed up in the description box down below, along with their affiliated Amazon links. So just know that if you do decide to purchase any of the paints through my Amazon affiliate links, Amazon will pay me a small amount in return. So thank you so much in advance if you do that. Now, the color value web was mixed up quite easily, okay? Not a lot of complicated mixtures went into that, and you're going to see that I'm going to make the colors more and more exacting as I go. So with the alla prima approach, okay? Not to overwhelm you with too much, think about this now as the second stage. So the first stage was the burnt umber drawing, okay? Or you can think of it as the block in. Just the block in, okay? Blocking in with simple straight lines and angles. Now we're moving into the large plane stage. So after the large plane stage will be the small plane stage, and then after that, the selective render. And then you're done. So yes, I know it's a very fast way to approach the painting, but it's a lot of fun to work in this way and really push yourself and see how much you can do in such a compressed amount of time. So now what I'm doing is I'm locking in these darker shapes, and as I mentioned before, I switched to larger bristle brushes. I think this is like a size 6 bristle brush that I was using. So yes, the bristle brushes, it's quite important to have the best bristle brushes that you possibly can. I highly recommend the Robert Simmons bristle brushes. I've been using it for some time now, and already, comparing it to the cheaper bristle brushes that I had before, what you feel, the difference that you feel with a higher quality bristle brush is that the paint just locks onto the bristles. So as you see right here, I just switched brushes, okay? So that is one of my older bristle brushes. And I remember when I first got it, the Master's Touch brand, it's a really inexpensive, it's basically an off brand, okay? A cheap off brand bristle brush. And it works quite nicely as a bristle brush. But now comparing it to the Robert Simmons brush, I do see the quality difference. I feel the quality difference tremendously here. And now what I did was I started using the medium. So remember, the medium is just 1 part stand oil to 4 parts mineral spirits. It's the same as the fraction that I was talking about, okay? Whether you like to hear it in parts or fractions. If it's a fraction, it just means 1/5 mineral spirits, 4/5 stand oil. Add the fractions, you get a whole. You can think of it as 1 part. So imagine it this way, okay? 1 teaspoon of stand oil, okay? 1 teaspoon of stand oil, and then 4 teaspoons of odorless mineral spirits. That's another way to look at the math. It's very, very simple. And it doesn't have to be that exacting, okay? But anyway, now let's talk about what I'm doing with the hair. So with the hair, I'm starting to put in these simple dark shapes. And the reason I chose this Waterhouse to do a master study of is just I've really enjoyed this painting for the longest time. I've never been able to see it in person. And like I said, I already mentioned what painting this is. So if you want to paint along with me, it's quite simple to find probably even better photo references than I showed you in the beginning of the episode. So you should really look for the best quality photo reference of an old master painting. I don't know. Can we think of Waterhouse as an old master? Certainly to me. He lived a long time ago, and he's a master, so I'm going to call him an old master. Okay, and I'm not talking about like Caravaggio or Rembrandt or anything like that. No, what you're seeing here is the subdivision of the large planes. So now we're going to start to hone in or focus into the main triangle. The main triangle being that is the 2 eyes and the nose, locking in those points, trying to get the perspective in check, trying to get each proportion in check, okay? Even though we're working in alla prima, we want to have the accuracy of if we were using the classical approach, or better yet, if this was a pencil drawing or a charcoal drawing. Now, the idea is you can only paint as well as you can draw, okay? So if you haven't been drawing that much, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be doing alla prima like what I'm doing here. It just means that there should be a little bit of a balance, okay? Spend as much time as you possibly can drawing with simple outlines, and then the language transitions into masses with painting, okay? Because with oil paint, it's much easier to use mass. And that is just because of the nature of oil paint. It's very forgiving. It's very easy to push around. Now, to compare this to what you've seen me use more recently, the water mixable oil paints. Again, don't get me wrong. These are traditional oil paints, not water mixable. Okay. The major difference, really, that I've noticed is the feeling of the paint. The water mixable feels kind of like it has a different feeling to compare it to the traditional oil paints. Now, these are the traditional oil paints, and they feel kind of like melted butter, especially when you have the nice consistency with the stand oil to mineral spirits, or if you're using Liquin or Neo McGilt. When you have the right consistency of medium to oil paint, it really does feel quite nice. Again, it's something like melted butter. So now you see the major planes that I'm starting to subdivide, okay? So we have the forehead, the side plane of the forehead, and now we have the top plane of the nose, and what we just put in was the side plane of the nose. And now color is a little different with the alla prima approach. With the classical approach, as you've heard me talk in the past videos, with the classical approach, you can really build up the colors. With Alla Prima, I want to say you want to go a little warmer at first. Try to get the color that you want, but go warmer. So what I'm doing right there is mixing black and white. So titanium white and ivory black. And we're putting in, there you go, just a tiny bit of flesh tone. So that's the formula, so to speak, for the color of the, wait for it, there. For the color of the sclera, okay? Very, very simple. Pretty much all of us have relatively the same color sclera, give or take, unless we're sick or, something. It's usually a little bit of flesh tone with gray. And that's the color you get for the sclera. So now what I did, or what I'm doing now, is transitioning quite quickly from the large plane modeling. Should I say modeling? But I'm transitioning from the large planes to the smaller planes. And the telltale sign of being in the smaller planes for me, as you're seeing right now, is the different brush, okay? I've switched back to synthetic. That is a synthetic brush. It is a Princeton synthetic brush. And you'll notice when I switch into smaller brushes, that usually means that I'm in the smaller plane divisions. Now, ideally, in theory, you want to think about working the entire painting all at once. Now, when you're doing a little bit of an abbreviated study, such as what I'm doing here, you want to lock in on the eyes, okay? And locking in on the eyes, such as what we just did there. So we have the top plane of the upper eyelid. We have the dark of the iris, the light of the sclera. We have an accent for the tear duct and a bottom plane for the lower eyelid. So what you want to do, especially with portrait, is lock into the eye and then adjust everything according to the eye. But I usually like to do this once I have my block in check. The block in is a nice time to get things wrong, but do your best to get it right, okay? And when you switch into this stage of the painting, you are now able to say, okay, if the eye is here, the eye to the left of my canvas is here, well, then the eye to the right of my canvas, see that? How I was relating an angle between the two eyes, okay? Now I have a reference point to relate shapes, okay? It can be very daunting to relate 50 different shapes to one another, whereas you can start off with one pinnacle point and then start to adjust everything to that point accordingly. It's just more practical, okay? It's just a little bit easier, and it doesn't always have to be that way. Remember. Now, as I usually say, with portrait painting, it's a little different. There's this psychological tendency of getting very, precious with the painting, or to try to make it look really human really fast. And that can be a bit of a problem. So notice how here with the other eye, I'm keeping it very simple. Nothing more than just a few little brush marks for the placement of the eye. Now, as I was saying, people are not as forgiving with portrait, in particular with the human head, okay? You know that I've painted dozens and dozens and probably hundreds now of these portraits. And I tell you one thing, people are just not as forgiving with faces, with portraits, okay? So that's one of the things that just makes it more daunting in particular. So that's why I'm telling you, lock in on the eyes after you get your block in check, like what we have here. This is a perfect example of how to prioritize your stages, because now, look how I'm using a vertical line here. I'm able to relate all of the subsequent points to that one point for the corner of the tear duct of the eye. But it's not really that precise, to be honest. I mean, I don't think the entire time I was painting this, I never pulled out a caliper or anything like that. If you want to get really specific, then, you might want to get a caliper and do specific measurements. But you want to leave a little bit of, freedom with your painting process. And like I said, this is a master study, okay? It is a master study of a Waterhouse painting, all right? Now, the purpose here is to create a study of the painting and not a copy. Traditionally, you want to do a master copy, try to get it as perfect as possible. And I'm just going to tell you that that's not what I'm after. I'm after perfecting my technique via observing what the masters have done. And now we're just starting to basically work the perimeter around the shape of the nose. So very quickly here, I'm actually going to relate the corner of the bulb of the nose to the eye. There's a very distinct angle to look for. And always look for angles and always use verticals and horizontals. I cannot emphasize that enough. So for instance, the corner of the nostril that I just painted in there, I'm not thinking of like nostril and detail or anything like that. I'm thinking of angle. I'm thinking of perspective. So in perspective, there you go. See, look at the angle. So I was actually relating the corner of the bulb of the nose to the corner of the eye to the right of the screen. And by relating these angles to one another, I'm able to further facilitate the drawing. Now, like I said, the main triangle is very, very important. And that is because, to be quite frank, the mouth is nothing, okay? The mouth is very, very simple to paint. I'm not going to be too proud of myself for painting a good mouth, but I am going to be proud of myself if I can relate, the eyes to the nose and then lock something in for the mouth. Even if the mouth is only 5 or 7 or 8 brushstrokes, it's important that I get the grand scheme of the image as accurate as possible. And okay, I'm going to be even more honest here. The nose, even like the nose, is not that difficult to paint. When you think about the complexity of placing the eyes correctly within the parameter of the outside shape of the head, that's much more complicated. Even the hairline, okay? Even the hairline. The hairline is so much easier to move. Okay? The jawline is so much easier to move. And I'm not even going to talk about the hair, okay? If I was trying to, put in a bunch of planes and curls and locks and things into the hair, I'd be in some trouble right now, because right now what really matters is locking in that main triangle, and in doing so, establishing also the perspective of the pose. And now I'm starting to work around the main triangle, okay? So after we put in that bottom plane for the lower nostril, now we're putting in some more rosy colors. So that's probably like a combination of flake white, yellow ochre, and cadmium red. And now we're putting in a little more of a side plane. But, even the cheekbones, even the cheek is not as complicated as locking in the main triangle, okay? Locking in the eyes. And you can already see that the mouth is going to have to move. The chin is going to have to move up a little bit, and that's okay. It's important to kind of have a strategy to approach the painting. And it's going to be kind of difficult, to be honest, for me to continue to work in this kind of way, because what I'm trying to do today, at least in today's episode, okay, since you're not really seeing me on camera, I didn't really talk to the camera directly at all. So what you're seeing is me painting at my natural element, okay? And I really want to do more of this, though at the same time I do like talking to the camera and, trying to be more personable. But at the same time, I've noticed that the majority of folks really care for the, this type of video, the tutorial kind of video voiceover, uh, realistic painting, and a painting in one video kind of thing. So, I've been listening to your suggestions. A lot of people have missed these longer videos. Um, these type of videos where one painting in one episode. So, you don't have to watch a million different episodes to get one painting out of it. So I am going to try my best to create more of these, though I don't know how realistic it's going to be to do these daily, but I will give it my best. And that's just me being truthful to you, okay? And now I'm just starting to soften some of the edges around the main triangle, in particular on the eyebrows, trying to get the angle of the eyebrows. And notice each time I use a smaller brush, that means I'm in the smaller plane division stage. So it's kind of a balance right now, okay? Because the cheekbone, the mandible, is still in the large plane stage, whereas the eyes are a stage above. They are in the the small plane phase. And so now, or stage, sorry. So now I'm starting to push the highlight a little more on the top plane of the nose. I'm really, really a fan of Waterhouse's portraits, his figures, and pretty much everything, okay? In particular, the drama in this pose, okay, as you've seen in the photo reference. Now, never in 100 years will I be able to create a painting anywhere near as perfect, or shouldn't say perfect because nothing is perfect, but nowhere near in the scope of what Waterhouse created with this pose. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that I'm sure that Waterhouse was working from life, and it's important to work from life as often as possible. That is my preferred way to work, to be honest. I usually don't try to push the finish on a painting too far if I'm working from a photo reference. Whereas, if I'm working from photo reference and then finishing it from life, as you've seen me do before, that's when I really tend to push the development of the painting further. I'm thinking Madam X for the next one, like a cropped version of Madam X. Sergeant's Madam X. I don't know. Let me know in the comments. I'm very interested in doing more paintings like this. And I have had many questions about the Rembrandt. Remember the Rembrandt master study I started a long time ago? Yeah, I kind of just lost patience with it, to be honest. But if you really, really want me to return to that Rembrandt, I'd have to dig for it. I don't know where it is, to be honest. I think it's in my living room, but I can do that as well. Now to get back on topic with the painting. So notice what type of brush I'm using. This is a bristle brush, though it's not a very large bristle brush, but we are in the large plane division stage, okay? So now what I'm starting to do is basically lock in the mandible. And like I said, the mandible is so much easier to move. And it's also, how am I going to say this? The distance from the bottom of the nose to the mandible is something that I'm looking for first. Okay? So the distance from the nose down to the mandible, I'm interested in that first before trying to lock in and render the mouth. Why? Because the mouth is child's play. Like, the mouth is not that difficult to paint relative to the eyes or relative to the nose. That doesn't mean that the mouth is, super easy to paint. I know many of us struggle with the mouth, but I'm just kind of giving you my mindset as I'm approaching this painting, or as I was approaching this painting. And right now we're going for the side planes first. I'm trying to get to the soft edge. And I'm actually using less medium to get a softer transition. Notice I'm relating now the nose to the edge of the chin. So see how we locked in the eyes Then we use that to lock in the nose. Now we're using the nose to lock in the proportion of the neck and all of that. As I always say, proportion is nothing more than relating things to one another, okay? The stand oil mixture is also a proportion if you really think about it. It's a relationship, 1/5 of this to 4/5 of that. It's a proportion. It's a relation. And the structure of the portrait or the placement of the elements in the portrait is the same kind of thing. And to be honest, I really think that I should put an affiliate link for my headphones, because these headphones, I know I'm getting off topic again. I apologize. That tends to happen with voiceover. But anyway, yeah, even when doing voiceover, I lose concentration super easily. So, like any kind of background noise that's going on around me, people are in the building that I'm in. And I know that they're there, but it's not bothering me because of these noise canceling headphones. So if you really want an affiliate link for these noise canceling headphones, honestly, it has helped me a lot today, and it is still helping me as I'm creating this voiceover and talking to you. But anyway, let's get back to the painting process. Okay, so notice the brush I'm using, okay? Keep an eye on the brush that I'm using. That is a large bristle brush. What does that mean? That I am in the large plane division stage. And I'm actually using little to no medium, like I said, for the softer planes, for the the mandible. Here is the side plane of the orbicularis oris, a little bit of the sap green into that mixture. Now I think that the photograph that I used for the to conduct this painting study is it kind of seems like it has a sepia filter to it or something. There's a little too much yellow greenish. So I was painting in that kind of sepia looking thing with the yellow greenish at this point. That's why I used the sap green. But at a certain point, I kind of noticed it and started to move away from those kind of mixtures. I'm pretty sure, Waterhouse didn't paint the painting, using too many greens and stuff in the flesh tones. At least I don't think. But I don't know. In any case, here is another plane change. So notice each brush stroke, it's pretty loaded with paint, okay? And I just find that's a much easier way to get softer edges, especially with alla prima. And so this is a plane here that's kind of sandwiched, okay? It's not as dark as the side plane of the cheekbone, but it's not as light as the area surrounding the mouth, also known as the maxilla. And it's darker than the top plane of the orbicularis oris, meaning the top of the mouth. And notice, even at this point, the mouth is nothing. Like I didn't even put the mouth in yet, okay? So the thing is, I'm looking at the structure encompassing the mouth, and it's just easier this way, especially if you're working, in alla prima. In the classical approach, I would probably do something similar to this, but of course in monochrome for an underpainting. But it's the same kind of concept, okay? The concept doesn't change, even though the technique has changed from classical to alla prima. The concepts and the fundamentals remain the same, and it's important to know the fundamentals and to know, what's practical and what's not practical in terms of your medium as well. For oil paint, it's really not that practical, I think, in my opinion, of course. It's not that practical to look at each one spot and try to fill in the dots like a coloring book. Though you can, and that can create a very photorealistic image, which is what people are into nowadays. But, coming from a classical standpoint, coming from a very traditional oil painting, traditional portrait painting, which is very rare these days to find now, kind of standpoint, you don't really want to fill in the dots. That's why you see me approaching these large planes with the larger brushes. And even with the other painting, I have I think 2 ongoing paintings right now, which are both still wet, which is why Today's episode is an alla prima study, which I might end up doing more of in the future. But anyway, um, even in the classical approach, the mouth is always malleable. It's always able to move. And now that I'm starting off with the colors for the mouth, notice that the flesh color for the mouth is different. Okay, it's warmer, obviously. So we use the alizarin crimson permanent into the darker middle tone region of the palette. And we're looking for simple shapes of light and dark for the mouth. And again, the mouth is child's play relative to the eyes, relative to the nose. Okay? Remember that. Don't try to, it's not the end of the day if the mouth is in the wrong spot. Even Sargent's quoted with saying a portrait is a painting in which something's wrong with the mouth or something like that. Of course, I paraphrased it, but even Sargent would say things like that. And so now I'm going to look for some of the smaller planes. Notice how I switched. So now we're we're basically switching gears from the large plane divisions, okay? And now notice how I'm using that little gesture to relate the corner of the nostril to the edge of the mouth. Okay, you see that? You see that kind of way to relate the shapes? At first everything was based off the eyes, and now I'm using the nose, to relate the placement of the mouth. And it's these kind of relationships, I think, that will, save you a lot of trouble. And also just having the freedom to work in this kind of way is really something special. I think that what helps me is the fact that most of the time that I'm painting, this might not be the right thing to say right now, but most of the time I'm painting, and okay, I'm going to be honest with you, okay, you're not going to like this. Most of the time I'm painting, I'm perfectly fine if, the painting falls on its face, or if somebody were to smear the painting or something like that. I usually don't get very attached or very precious with my paintings, all right? That's not always the case. Sometimes I do get attached, especially with the Steve painting and stuff, but, that's one thing that actually helps me. And the more you paint, the more you practice your craft. I don't know how to say it, but the more kind of detached you become to the actual painting itself. You're more in the moment of creating the painting than you are in the moment of trying to decorate the painting, okay? It's not like I'm trying to decorate some space on the wall of my house or something like that. I'm not trying to decorate, in this case, my room, but, the idea is not to get too precious with the painting. And I think that that's something that's actually helped me quite a bit. I never really talk about it, just because I'm usually when I'm talking and painting at the same time, there's a lot of multitasking. Whereas in this approach, the painting's already done. I'm voicing it over after the fact. So it's like we're watching it together. So I'm telling you, at this point in the painting, I was not very precious with the painting. Neither, I wasn't even that way at the end of the painting. And that being said, I was very satisfied with the way that this study looked. Obviously, it didn't look exactly like the Waterhouse painting, and that's not what I was intending. But again, there's another psychological thing to painting as a whole. So, how I said earlier, there's a psychological thing when you're painting a portrait where you want to make it look very human very quickly, and you're worried because everyone judges portraits more than anything else. But there's something to be said about that in painting as a whole. I think, if you've done as many paintings as me, you kind of know the feeling, that kind of detaching from the individual painting. And there we just very quickly threw in the background. So with my editing, actually, I'm going to cut out things that are overly repetitive. So that's going to save a lot of time. Now, if you want to see me painting, like if you want to see every single brushstroke, I do have videos featuring every single brushstroke. those do hurt my views a little bit. So, this is YouTube. The views are kind of important. So, if it's too long, it actually hurts the views. But in any case, I will have live streams now. Okay. So if you want to watch me paint live, those are offered through my Patreon account. So if you want to see, live streams or talk to me in real time, I do have the Patreon account now. But in any case, now with this larger brush, I'm starting to put in some more shapes for the hair. And I'm using basically a combination of the cadmium red and the yellow ochre. And in there somewhere, there's a little tint of the burnt umber. If I made her hair too red, we'd get kind of a Ronald McDonald kind of look, which is not what I was after with the color of the red hair. Though, I haven't seen that clown in a long time. You know the one I'm talking about, the Ronald McDonald clown? I don't know. I'm getting off topic again. Sorry about that. So anyway, it's important to look at the saturation of your colors. You're not really going to see too many neon pinks or like super bright reds or anything like that. When you're working from life in particular, photo reference, it might change if, you put a filter on your picture or something like that. Even in life, if you have a super bright colored light, you're never really going to see a color super saturated like a cadmium, like right out of the tube. You usually don't see that unless the lighting is like radioactive or something like that, but we're not going to go there. So I'm using a thinner application of paint now. So that is the ultramarine blue and titanium white. So with Alla Prima, thinner paint tends to stick onto thicker paint. And that's nothing new. That's been known for centuries now. But the idea is that the, like a fluid seeking the path of least resistance. So that's why the thinner paint, it just kind of adheres onto the thicker layers of paint. And only a few brushstrokes. I'll only use a few brushstrokes for the headband. But we're almost there, okay? If you're still sticking with me until this point, please give yourself a pat on the back. Write in the comments, perseverance. You have perseverance. If you're still, at this stage of the painting footage, there's only about 5 minutes or maybe a little bit left. A little bit less than 5 minutes. So now, see that? We're using the smaller brushes now. So every single area of the painting is now in the small plane division stage, which in fact means that we're closing in on the finish, because after the small planes, the last thing that's left is the selective render stage. So these planes, okay, these tones on the side of the cheekbone, you want to be very, very careful with them. You don't want to make them too dark, because you'll get comments like I get sometimes. People say that I gave the model Botox or something like that. And again, there's nothing wrong, okay? I know people that have had Botox and things like that, and there's nothing wrong with that, okay? This is 2019. You can look however you want to look. You can be however you want to be, okay? I'm not judging anyone on their particular appearance or anything like that. But in any case, the mandible, the angle of the mandible is very important. The angle of the cheekbone can be related to the angle of the mandible. That is, the mandible is a much faster turn. In fact, it goes into shadow. And the cheekbone is very similar. Okay, that plane right there is very similar. But the angle is slightly less so, which means that the value is not as dark. It's not as drastic of a plane change. And in fact, this plane beneath the mouth, beneath the bottom plane of the orbicularis oris, that is a much sharper plane division. Therefore, it is much darker underneath of the mouth. And, this isn't anything new. It's a concept that I've talked about plenty of times. The angle that a plane makes with respect to a given light source, given you're not thinking of patterns or anything like that. On the face, since the face is mostly matte, we're conceptualizing it as mostly like a matte kind of finish, like a plaster cast. each angle, okay, now look at the subtlety, okay? There's going to be a lot of repetitive stuff going on, which I will cut out, so you can see a much more kind of streamlined video, much more streamlined footage. So in any case, each plane change, okay, has a very specific meaning, a very specific purpose. It is in fact very scientific, in fact, because it's almost mathematical in a way, because a given plane has a kind of vector. It has direction and magnitude with respect to the light source. And that's what I'm doing. I'm thinking three-dimensionally now to try to impose as much of a realistic volumetric effect on the painting as I possibly can. And in fact, I think that this painting probably, in terms of form, went a little further than my usual ones that I use, paint from photo reference. Again, I really want to paint from life. That's just much more expensive. You got to pay the model fees and then the sittings and all of that. But as you see there, okay, I worked out much more of the plane changes, and now the face is much more dimensional. Now it's not pretty. It's not perfect polish finish or anything like that. But we can get the effect of dimension. We get the effect of volume, and it kind of looks like the Waterhouse painting. Like I said, it's a master study. We're using our own techniques and, trying to pick and choose things that we can learn from the masters. And now it's just down to softening certain edges. So just for the top plane of the head, and then I will soften a little bit around the chin, around the mandible, and then we're going to pretty much just call this painting finished. And a little more down here. All right, that being said, that is the end of today's episode. I really hope that it helps you out. I wish you the best in all of your artwork. Here is an image of the painting with the camera as close to front and centered as possible, so you can see it now with less distortion. That being said, I really do hope that you have a wonderful day. Always and always and always remember, in a world that can be so negative, be the spark that ignites positivity amongst all of us. I truly hope that today's episode helps you out, and if you want to support this channel even more, we now have a Patreon account where I'm offering things such as live chats and live streams as well. So thank you so much, and I'll see you again very soon.